Hello YouTube, this is You Can Do It Dave. On the fourth video of how to make a 26-inch round window for my Hobbit home, I will be walking you through the steps that I'm using to make the faceplate, the pivot points. Now this is the second piece of the body of the window. I'll make two of these little guys. Okay, and the window sash that we've already made up will sit inside of that and pivot. Okay, lots of room to pivot. Okay, so I'll make up two of these, glue them together, drill in the pivot points in here, right in here, and that should give it lots of room to pivot. Okay, we'll see how it works. So now, as you can see, I wanted to use up my little bits of scrap wood, so I mixed and matched. Okay. I also found that you don't have to be exact with the joinery, the joints, because within a certain limit, you're going to be rounding this off. Okay, so as long as you get it centered here, if this board is a little bit out, as long as the router is still going to hit it, you can kind of play with it and rescue your mistakes. So now that we're working on the pivot points of the main body of the window, I have to give you a little bit of a warning, okay, because we're working with a fairly wide board, and using this method of one screw per board, I found that after I was done cutting the inside and outside off, my screw holes were gone. Very difficult to find the center of this once you have no bearing on where it goes on the board. Now the inner circles, the circle every inch that I drew does help a lot, but you're kind of guessing at where it's supposed to go. What I recommend for the smaller bits is to put in more screws. I put in 2, 4, 6, and you only have to put in 6 on each side. Okay, as long as you have these guide holes, if you cut everything else off, you can still attach it. It'll still line up fairly accurately. Okay, so let's get routering. Okay, so I've finished routering the pivot frame. Okay, and that's these two pieces here. And the window sash is going to fit right in between those. Okay, so just like that. So we'll have the pivot points. Okay, and I'm going to just basically use the same pins that I used for this board. Okay, I'm going to have two pins, and they're going to be on each side, and that will basically be my pivots. Nothing fancy. I don't need any ball bearings or anything like that. So when I was routering this frame, the first one, as I mentioned before, I cut off all my screw holes. So when I went to mount it back on the board, all I had to go by was the lines on the board, which was fairly accurate, but there was a millimeter or two around in certain spots where it was overlapping. So a lot of router bit kits come with router bits with ball bearings on the top or bottom, and I just put one of those in, and basically what it does is the ball bearing runs on the top one and smooths off the bottom one. Or vice versa, you could have the ball bearing on the bottom one and router off the top one. So now this does need quite a bit of sanding, or not quite a bit, but a little bit of sanding. Let's install some pins and see how it pivots. So now to install the pivot pins, I figure I have this really nice board here with all the measurements. So 28, 28. Okay, so 28, 28. That should be centered right about there. Yep, that's centered. And since I have this really nice board with all the little holes in it, I am going to give it a try and use the center line to install my pivot points. So we'll center that on the lines as well. Okay. Something like that. Okay. Now for all of you out there who have to have the tape measure and the calculator and oh no, we gotta figure this out by the millimeter, just turn away. I don't want to make you cry. Okay? So here we have the pivot frame centered on the rings, the window sash centered on the rings. Okay. Now all we got to do is go on this center line and drill in. So let's see. Now what's nice about using this you don't want to go too deep in. Okay, so we're going to put a piece of tape on there. Now I'm only going to drill in about as deep as my pivot pin. So what I will do is I will take a little piece of tape and put it on the drill bit right there. Okay. So everything's centered. See, the gap is the same all the way around. Okay. So now going in between the two boards. It moves. It moved. So what I can do is, using this center line, just like that, mark there and there, squeeze them together so they stay together, and then slide them off the board. Okay. Now, in between the two frames, in the center, we can drill. Make sure it's in the center of the two boards and nice and level. Okay. There's pivot point number one. So now we can slide it back. Maybe even put the pin in. Then spin it around. Don't mind my noisy neighbors. Okay, we can center it again. Now we still have the lines over there. Okay. Squeeze it together. And that should work. So on the center line, we can mark a line, pull it off, and drill a hole. Just like that. Okay. And then we can put that pivot point in. Now we can center the frame by just sliding it down the pivot points. Okay. And if we've done it right, nope. And there you go. Okay, so after installing the pivot points, and drilling the holes, you can kind of move it around, and you can see that the spacing is all the same. Okay, so now we can get the face frame, and the way I made up the face frame was I routed out this piece wider than the bottom piece. Okay, so when it's up against the building, this will be the rain falling. It'll keep the rain out of the top of the window, but it'll allow the rain to run out of the bottom. Okay. Okay, so you've seen how I put in the pivot points. I was kind of playing fast and loose there, not really being too precise, just kind of lining it up and drilling the holes. The reason I was doing that was because the inside of this sash and the pivot frame, nobody's going to see. Okay, so worst case scenario, you pull it out, you glue it, you mix up some glue and sawdust, you fill up the hole, you give it a 1/8 of a turn, and you try again. Okay, the whole premise of this window frame is you can do it. Okay, you don't have to sit there for 2.5 hours trying to figure out the math and the exact positioning, and just do it. Go ahead, give it a try. Okay, now luckily it worked for me. Okay, I didn't have to retry it and retry it and retry it, but it worked. And this is what I came up with. Okay, so I've got 2 clamps holding it together. Let's see if I can get it on camera here. And there is my window. Okay, you have the space where you have the drip edge where the water is going to run down the front, and you have the drip edge where the water is going to run out, and the window opens like that. Now I will be putting some rubber stops right here so that the window will slope and let the rain run out. But yeah, that works. And if you really want to know, you can flip it over here. And the spacing in between the sash and the frame is darn near perfect. There's no... It's the same spacing all the way around, like within 1 millimeter. So good enough for me. This is my very first window. I can do this. So let's recap. In this video, I made up 3 more frames, the same way I did in video 1 and video 2 of this series. Okay, I routed out the face frame, and then I routed out the 2 pivot frames. Okay, the 2 pivot frames are the same thickness as the window sash, and that's what allows the window sash to pivot in line. Okay, so once you get the pivot frame and the window sash lined up and centered, then all you have to do is put your face frame on it and you're in business. So this is it for this video. In my next video, I will be working on the body of the window that goes through the house, So this is You Can Do It Dave, and we will see you next time.